I'm sure that most of you have at least heard of Silent Hill, especially if you're into playing video games. But for those of you that either haven't heard of it or just need a quick refresher, let me give you a very basic overview of the series. In almost all of the games, you find yourself heading to the small town of Silent Hill. A blanket of fog falls around you as you enter the town, so thick that your view is constricted to just a few feet. Once there, you realise that the town has been mostly abandoned, apart from several, often suspicious characters. You search around the derelict buildings, looking for clues and solving puzzles, hoping to find answers about the town and why you're there. And, since this is a horror franchise, you are not alone while doing this. Monsters wait in the fog, ready to pounce as you walk by, stalking you through buildings and hiding around corners. The games often focus on psychological horror. The town is able to morph and transform depending on the mental state of the main character, conjuring up scenarios and monsters straight from the depths of their subconscious. It's scary stuff, and the games performed well, leading to a film being made following the same basic premise. When making a film, especially one with an already established fanbase, it's important to do your research, and it was during the research stage of the Silent Hill film that the screenwriter wanted to visit a real-life ghost town. The ghost town he chose was Centralia, Pennsylvania, where a fire had been blazing underground for 60 years, destroying roads and opening up giant sinkholes, the fiery pits looking like portals into hell. And with a thick smoke covering the town, it's easy to see why the screenwriter took some inspiration from it. But how did the town end up that way? Let's take a look at the real Silent Hill. Home to only 5 people, Centralia is a tiny town located in Columbia County, Pennsylvania. And while there are no monsters hiding in the shadows, the smoke billowing out of huge cracks in the ground and the eerie silence easily has you feeling isolated and on edge. But it wasn't always that way. In the early 1960s, the town was a bustling community, built around the new coal mines that had begun operating in the area. The town had its own schools, churches and hotels, a post office and a bank, along with several shops and even a couple of theatres. They also had their own landfill, which was located in an old, previously cleared strip mine. The use of such pits for landfill sites was regulated, and inspections had to be carried out frequently. This was due to the high risk of mine fires starting in these pits. Since the pit itself would have been part of a larger complex, all it would take for a fire to spread would be a tiny hole in the wall or floor of the pit. An inspector had been out to the Centralia landfill and had raised his concerns about several holes in the pit, informing those responsible that they would need to be plugged with non-flammable materials. Unfortunately, at least one large hole, about 4.5 meters wide, was missed due to the piles of waste blocking it from view, and so, when the questionable and illegal decision was made to burn the landfill to make more room, the town's fate became sealed. On the 27th of May 1962, a group of 5 firefighters were tasked with lighting the landfill on fire and monitoring it. They extinguished the flames later that same day, only to have it reappear the following morning. Again, they extinguished it, and again, the flames came back. When a bulldozer was used to move the leftover waste, they found the hole, but by then, it was already too late. The fire had burned its way into the old mine complex, using any leftover coal, even just coal dust, as fuel, beginning a chain reaction that would be almost impossible to stop. They worked for several more days, attempting to douse the fire, and people living nearby began to complain about the foul smell being carried by the smoke. Eventually, the Centralia Council had to reach out for help, knowing that they could not contain the fire themselves. As Centralia was such a small town, they didn't have the funds for a large-scale excavation of the site, and so had to rely on the state to finance the project. This was a fairly lengthy process though, and the fire had been burning for over 2 months by the time the project was awarded to a company. By that time, fissures had appeared around the landfill site, with plumes of smoke leaking out of them, containing high levels of carbon monoxide. Lethal levels of carbon monoxide had also built up within the nearby mines that were still in operation. Eventually, they would be closed down, as the fire continued to work its way through the mines. Several attempts were made by different companies to extinguish the fire, but coal mine fires are notoriously difficult to put out. Fires in these mines have a huge amount of fuel and can burn for hundreds of years. Just getting to the fire to attempt to put it out can be incredibly challenging, as each time an opening is made, oxygen will rush in, feeding the fire and allowing it to jump further into the tunnels. This was the downfall of the first attempt. They just couldn't keep up with the fire, and ultimately, they had to abandon the project. Another company attempted to smother the fire by dumping huge amounts of crushed rock and water into the mine. Unfortunately, unseasonably cold weather caused their equipment to freeze, slowing their progress. They also ran out of the mixture and had to attain further funding, but that too ran out. All the while, more fissures were appearing around town, hundreds of meters from the landfill now. Eventually, the state gave up on trying to extinguish the fire, and the town just carried on. The people of Centralia went about their lives, even as more cracks spewing foul-smelling smoke appeared. The locals were mostly unaware of the scale of the fire. That was until 1977, 15 years after the fire started. Many stories began to circulate around town about strange, heat-related occurrences. Some residents reported that their basements were so hot that they didn't need to use their hot water heaters before having a bath. Others claimed that the vegetables they were growing in their gardens had been burnt to a crisp. Despite this, nothing was done, as the various government and agencies involved argued amongst themselves about who should be dealing with the situation and who should foot the bill. A couple of years later, a man testing the fuel levels of an underground gas tank realised that the gas was hot. He dropped a thermometer down on a string to measure the temperature and was shocked to see it read almost 78 degrees Celsius. Then, 2 more years later, the dangers of the unseen blaze became very clear. A 12-year-old boy was playing in his yard with his cousin when he felt a rumble from deep underground, beneath his feet. He looked down and watched as the grass and soil began to shift, drooping downwards, a large tear appearing in the centre, getting bigger and bigger. He backed up, trying to get away from the smoke that was now exploding out of the ground, but before he got far, the ground opened up, disappearing from under his feet. He threw his arms out, fingers reaching for anything to grab onto, and, luckily, they found something. He hung from a root that was sticking out from the dirt, desperately clinging to it as hot smoke blew past him. He shouted for his cousin, and they were able to pull him out of the hole. It sounds like something out of a video game, having the ground open up beneath you, revealing a burning pit far below. Not to mention the hot smoke pouring out, which contained a lethal amount of carbon monoxide. Even after this incident, the seriousness of the fire was downplayed. All the while, the small carbon monoxide sensors inside the town's homes began to trigger constantly. And then, one night, several people passed out due to the buildup of gases, only waking when a neighbour who had luckily fallen out of his bed and realised what had happened, began phoning everybody in the neighbourhood, making sure they were all okay. Finally, the government realised that they had to do something, but rather than attempting to put out the fire, they instead declared the land too dangerous to live on and began trying to move the residents out of the area. Many families, not wanting to live with the constant threat of fiery sinkholes, sold their homes to the state and moved away. Those closest to the fire were given less than ideal offers, but ultimately had no choice as their home was under threat of burning down. But still, some refused to go. No matter how much money they were offered, even when their neighbours' homes were demolished around them. Centralia was their home, and they would not be leaving it. They pleaded for something to be done about the fire, but nothing was. The town quickly became filled with abandoned and derelict buildings, which were eventually pulled down. After many years of trying to get the remaining families to leave, the state came to an agreement with those that wanted to stay, allowing them to live there until their deaths, at which point their homes would be demolished. And that brings us to the current state of the town. Inhabited by just 5 people, the plots around their homes have already been reclaimed by nature. Smoke continues to pour out of the many fissures and sinkholes around the town, often blanketing the empty streets. Smoke can even be seen swirling out from under rocks, and sometimes it appears like the ground itself is giving off steam. Several of the remaining buildings, such as the town hall, have fallen into disrepair, and the main road into the town, a section of Route 61, became so cracked and damaged that it had to be closed. Abandoned towns are often referred to as ghost towns, and this probably stems from the uncomfortable feeling many of us get when we are in a place that should be bustling with life, but is now silent. Towns, even quiet ones, are filled with noises. People talking, cars driving by, dogs barking, water running down a drain, children laughing. But in a ghost town, you still have the roads, the buildings, the playgrounds, but no accompanying sounds. The surrounding land has become blackened and charred. Dead trees litter the landscape, and rubble from destroyed homes lies scattered on the ground. The town was alive once, but now it is just a ghost. It's no wonder that a town like Centralia served as inspiration for a horror film. A small, abandoned town sat atop a raging fire that has burnt for decades, with holes opening up in the ground, revealing a fiery sea below. The town did not just draw the attention of the Silent Hill screenwriter, and many people travelled to Centralia, curious to see the ghost town for themselves. This led to the stretch of unused highway becoming something of a tourist attraction, as those that visited wrote their name on it, creating what became known as the Graffiti Highway. The road was eventually removed, as a new road had been constructed to replace it, and authorities wanted to discourage people from travelling to the area. The fire beneath Centralia could burn for upwards of 250 years, and by then, the town will be a true ghost town. The last of the residents will have gone, and all that will remain will be empty roads, smoke winding through the trees, and the distant crackle of an unseen fire. If you enjoyed this video, please consider subscribing to the channel and leave any suggestions for future videos down in the comment section below. Thanks for joining me for this story, and keep yourself safe out there.